To finish this section of the course, let's now take care of the functionality of the pop-up that we just built. Now the way that we're going to make this work is by taking advantage of something that exists in HTML, which is called anchors. Now let me start by first showing you that somewhere else on our page, okay? So let's see how anchors work. So imagine that here on our tours section, I would place an ID, okay, and also called section tours. So it doesn't really matter here, it can be the same as the class. So I call this one here section tours with this ID. And so remember that IDs are unique, and so this here will be the only section called section tours, of course. And so HTML knows that. Now if I go up here and go to this button here, which we have, well, where is it? Here. So discover our tours. Okay, and so now I can put that ID name in here. So hash section tours. And let me show you what happens then. Well, first we have to actually hide this pop-up here. Okay, so let's very quickly do that. Just with display none. And we're gonna come back later to this. Okay, so now it's gone. And now when I hit this button, it goes to this section here. Okay, and you actually see it here in the URL. So section tours. And this is what's called an anchor. So here is now basically the anchor. And we can also say in other words that this is the target. So basically this element here was the target of that, okay? Now I'm just showing you that so that we can later make use of that target, okay? So remember this, and we're gonna come back to it in a second. Now before we can actually start with that functionality, we need to first hide this pop-up. But display none, as we have here, is not the best way, because if we have display none, we can then not animate it. Okay, so display is either none or something else. There's no numbers, and so we cannot animate it over time. So let's do it in a different way, and we did it already before a couple of times. So opacity 0, and also visibility hidden. Because remember, if we just set the opacity to 0, then basically the text and the content will still be there, just not visible. And so now with visibility hidden, it's also at the same time hidden. And now, how do we actually make the pop-up visible? Well, we just used what we talked a minute before, and that is the anchor and the target. Okay? So what I'm going to do is first in the HTML, here in this tour, where is it? Yeah, here. So I will set this one here to pop up. So this is the button that should show or pop up when we click it, right? So this button, this one, and this one. And then we need to specify the ID down here at the pop-up. So ID pop-up. So when we click that button, then the anchor will basically become this pop-up. So the target, remember I called it the target, okay? So this pop-up here will become the target. And so what can we do here is to simply say, and that's actually it. So we have the pseudo class called target, which applies to the element which is the target when we click on the button, or basically when the URL changes to having target in it. Because let me show you that to you. If we now hit this here, you will see that now we have pop-up here. Okay, so in the URL, now we have pop-up. And so that is the target. And the target is on this pop-up here. And so we can do it like this. And now all I have to do is to say opacity 1 and visibility visible. And that's it. Now we also need to animate it here a bit. So let's say transition all in 0.3 seconds. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Well, we need to delete this here. And now take a look. And here we go. So the pop-up is now visible. Great, right? So it actually worked. Well, we have no way of closing it right now, but we will take care of that later. Let me show it again to you. I think the animation wasn't working quite well, but the functionality at least, that is on point already. So it's working already right now. Okay, and the animation was not working because of these 0.3, I was missing the second here. But again, the functionality is just fine. So let me recap what happens here, so that we're 100% on the same page. So we have this button here, right? And so this one here. So we click this one here, and then as soon as we click, this here gets added to the URL of the page, okay? And so hash popup becomes the target. Okay, but since this one here has the ID of popup, the target is basically this entire element, okay? And so as soon as this element becomes the target, the pseudo class called target is available on it. And so we can then select that element using that pseudo class as we did here, and then specify our styles on it. And that's all we did. And as you see, it's working quite well. Now what we need next is a way of closing this popup. So let's actually put that here in the HTML. So we need like a small button. And so let's put that in here actually. So an anchor tag and popup close. Now the href here, it will be actually called section tours. Okay, and why is that? Well, because when we hit this link here, it will move to the section tours, okay, just as we did with the other button, and then this will become the target, right? And if the section tours becomes the target, then the popup is no longer the target, meaning that the pseudo class here no longer applies, and then that means, of course, that these styles disappear and the popup will be hidden again. So back to the initial state. All right, did that make sense? So basically what this closing button will do is to remove the target from the popup so that it simply loses these styles and then is back to its initial closed state. Okay, so let's now style that closing element. And actually we should put some text here. We just left it empty. And instead of putting a real icon here or something, I will just use another HTML entity, and that's called times. And that's basically like an X, okay? So popup close, and here it is. So if I now hit this one, and I think this H2 is now on top of it, but let's try it. No, it's not working because this is on top. So we first need to actually style it and position it. So popup close, and it's here already. And so let's do some positioning of this link. So we want the link state and the visited state. The color should be, well, the color of the text. I think we have a variable for that. Or actually not, I think. But it's here. I think it's simply this color. All right, so color gray dark. Then the position should be absolute. We want it 2.5 rem from the top and from the right. So basically in the top right corner. Let's increase it. And so 3 rem. And of course we want no text decoration. And it should also be displayed as an inline block. Okay, and then as soon as we hover it, it should just become green, so color primary. So let's take a look at that now. Well, we set the position here to absolute, and so it will be positioned to its first positioned parent. So which one is that? Well, it is actually the popup itself. Or isn't it? No, I think it's not, because the parent of this one here is the popup right, which doesn't have a defined position, but then the popup content has. And so it will be positioned relative to the popup content, which is fine. So we don't need to specify the position property on its parent element, okay? So let's just check this out. And here we go. And it actually worked already, right? So now here the target is section tours, and that means that the popup gets closed because, of course, the target is no longer the popup. All right, now it's not already positioned the way we want it to be, and it's not becoming green, but that's a minor problem that we can fix now. So the color, of course, the problem is this one. And now as for the position, let's take a look at that again. So turning green now, But let's inspect it. And yeah, I see why that's happening. It's because you see it's really high, this element. It's much higher than actually the X symbol itself is. And that's because this is text. And so it has this predefined line height that we defined. So we should just set the line height to 1. And then it will actually be exactly here in the place where we want it to be. All right. So it now opens and closes just fine. But there's still one minor difference here, and that's this one. Take a look at the box now. So you see it basically it's coming in towards the user from the back of the page, zooming in towards us. So how do we do that? Well, that's actually very easy. Let's just go back here and well, let me take this code and put it a bit more down where it's more logical to be. So down here. So we want to style the content here, right? At the moment where the pop-up is opening. Well, and when does that happen? Well, of course, when the pop-up becomes the target. Of course, not that one. So, makes sense? Again, the pop-up here becomes the target, and then we simply style the child element of the pop-up, which is called pop-up content. Okay? So what should the initial state of this content be? Well, it's basically scaled down and it's also invisible, right? And so let's start by putting the opacity to 0 and we scale it. Now I'm going to put a transform here and scale, but it's not going to work. And I'm going to show you why. But I hope that you can already imagine why it's not going to work. Okay, because we actually ran into this problem before. So let me just show it to you. Well, that's the original, of course. That was stupid. So just so we can see it, let me show it to you. And so it's here. It's actually scaled down, but it's down here, where it should not really be, right? So let me inspect it and show it to you why it's happening this way. So the content here, reload it, and yeah, all right. So you see why it's happening? Because we defined this transform here, but we already had one transform. And you can only have one transform or one property in each declaration block, of course. And so this one here appears last, and therefore it overrides this one. Okay, so let's fix that. And we know that this transform actually comes from this absolute center. So what do we do when we want two transforms at the same time? Well, we have to put them in the same. And so we're basically repeating the one that we have coming from our mixin, but that's the only way that we have here to do it this way. Okay, and so now it should look all right. Okay, and now all we have to do is to then scale it back to 100% as soon as the pop-up opens. Okay, so let's do that. So the opacity is 0, so it's invisible, and then we put it back to 1 and scale it back to 1. Okay, so these here are basically the open states. So these two is when the pop-up is open, and that's when it's at the exact position with the perfect size, the perfect opacity, and of course the same thing here for the pop-up container, basically. All right, and with that, we're almost good to go, I believe. We just have to add the animation here. So transition, all 0.4 seconds, let's say. So let's take a look at that now. All right, I just want to add something here to show you, and that's a small delay. So remember, transition is just a shorthand for a bunch of transition related properties, and one of them is transition delay. And so we can just delay this transition here by 0.2 seconds. So basically with this, we first allow the black background to come in, and then after that, we fade in our pop-up box, okay? So our pop-up content here. Well, it's actually not exactly after the pop-up fades in because that takes 0.3 seconds, but 0.2 is absolutely fine here. So we don't have to wait all the way until it's completely fade in. So let's try that now. And yeah, so I think that actually looks better. And maybe we can even start from something smaller here than 0.5. Let's say how it looks like with 0 and fading it in through half a second. So again, we can experiment with this, make it look like we want. And yeah, I like that one as well. Let's take a look again. All right, I think that works as well too. Maybe it's a bit too much, so let's put 0.25, but with that we should be good to go. Then again, you can change these values for yourself if you want to, but I really like it this way. All right, and with that we finished this huge part of the project. So almost 25 lectures, I believe, is this section. And so I'm really glad that you're still sticking with me here at this point. It's really good that you coded this entire web page here. And so I hope that you really feel this sense of accomplishment after creating such a huge project, okay? So really great job, and congratulations for that. However, we are not really done with this project, okay? Because right now it works on a big screen like this one. But what happens if we would see this on a mobile device? So what happens if we have a smaller screen like this? Well, then this is really a disaster, right? It doesn't look good at all. It's terrible, really. And so since this course is on advanced CSS and responsive design, I'm going to teach you how to make this design responsive over the next section, including a topic called responsive images, which is actually a pretty advanced topic. And so there's a lot more coming up in the next section. Really great content again. And so yeah, hope to see you there, and I'm waiting for you there.